Hello, good afternoon, and it's our pleasure to welcome you to the very first episode of the Speak podcast. It's my pleasure to be your co-host today. My name is Bushra Ali, and I'm the Regional Professional Development Specialist at EduEnhance. At EduEnhance, we have the honor of exclusively representing curriculum associates in the Middle East and Africa, and Curriculum Associates being an education publisher based in the U.S., and now I'd like to introduce my co-host, Iram Farhat Farouk, with whom I have the pleasure of working. She is the CEO of EduEnhance. Iram, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and also talk about why we're doing this podcast.
Thank you so much, Bushra. Today is a very exciting day for us because it's the first time we are hosting a podcast. And the whole idea behind this podcast was that we've been meeting educators. So I myself am an educator by profession, a teacher by profession. Got into the profession almost 20 years ago, and have been in the UAE for the last 14 years. So I've worked as a teacher, I've worked as an administrator, been an education entrepreneur. But throughout this journey, especially in the UAE, the diversity is so beautiful. And, you meet people from different nationalities, different parts of the world. And you meet educators and teachers, leadership, and you realize that everybody is trying to make a difference. Everybody is trying to have a brighter future for the children. It just gets you so inspired. And you want to do your best, and you want to try and bring in whatever value, whatever programs, whatever resources you can to empower the educators. So the whole idea behind this podcast was that we'll have a platform where we'll invite different stakeholders from the education fraternity who can come and exchange ideas, give us their feedback of what their highs are in education, what are the challenges they are facing, and how is it that they are ensuring that within their school buildings, they are giving the best to the students. So super excited because our first guests today are Ms. Vanessa and Ms. Aisha Brooks. We welcome you on the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll briefly introduce Ms. Vanessa and Ms. Aisha before asking you some questions for our audience to get to know you better. So Ms. Vanessa Gay-Rice is the head of teaching and learning at Meredith American School here in Dubai. And Ms. Aisha Brooks is the head of curriculum at Clarion School here in Dubai. So I think the best way of introducing yourself is to talk about your why, because education is a very unique industry to be in. It's very specific. So please tell us, what brought you to education? What's your why?
For me, my why is probably a little bit different, especially being internationally now as opposed to where I'm from in the United States. I grew up in a very small rural area of Alabama, and I have a couple of teachers who come to mind, and I'm going to talk just briefly about them. I had a first grade teacher who I can still remember to this day as I was learning to read, to really read and comprehend. And feeling that I received when I was able to read something fluently, could talk about it and answer questions in first grade. And that was my first grade teacher, Ms. Robinson. So that holds dear to me. And then there was a teacher that I had in fifth grade named Ms. Harris, who also instilled this caring, the desire to see every student that she had do well. And when you live in an area where I grew up, especially back in the 70s in the United States, it is different. And so having that desire to see everyone learn, but not putting this label on someone who struggles to learn to read. And so if you remember the book, Leo, the Late Bloomer, I always think about that when I'm dealing with children. And so I always had the desire somehow to work with children. And one day I decided, you know what? I think this is what I want to do. I think I want to be in the classroom. And from there, having been a teacher in the classroom, I went to being someone who did professional development, then became a vice principal of a school, did principal for a short interim spell. And now I'm in the field of what I love, which is deciding or helping to determine what it is and how students learn, and then building those relationships with students, I think. And that's what I saw growing up, and that's a part of what I've always wanted to be and do for children. I always said that if I ever get to the point that I don't like it, that I would leave education. So over 25 years later, I'm still in it, so I still love it.
That's excellent. And that's how it is, education, isn't it? They say you can take the teacher out of the school,
Never take
but you
school out
can't
of
take the
teacher.
school out of the teacher.
Exactly.
So, Miss Aisha, please go ahead.
So my why started at a very early age. My mom was an educator, still currently is. She's retired twice and back in a school now, even though she's supposed to be here with me. She has the same passion that I have, and I actually got to see that firsthand. I lived in a very small town in the mountains of Virginia, and she actually taught my first grade class when my teacher went on kindergarten, class, and my teacher went on maternity leave. So I got to see her in action, and I fell in love with that ever since. So I tortured cousins and friends with having to be in my very strict classes, and so that's really where I caught the bug. And then just kind of moving through and working with students in on the mental health side. My husband has an agency, and I've worked with students on the mental health side and just saw kind of the need and the disparity. And I felt a lot of that came actually from lack of resources from education and literacy mainly. So that is what kind of sparked my dreams of being an educator. And so I've been an educator, a teacher coach, in administration now. I've led PD and talked in many different areas of education in many different places. So that's my why.
Beautiful.
I love that question because it starts us off feeling so inspired.
Yeah.
So you've talked a bit about your journey as educators. So what brought you to the UAE?
So for me, I wanted to have an experience outside of the United States, but mainly and honestly, I wanted my child to have an experience. I wanted him to be an actual world leader. I wanted him to have an international experience, and I was right. How he moves and how he talks and his beliefs are all shaped by tons of different factors that aren't in maybe a bubble of one place that's not necessarily connected to other places. And so being here, we've traveled a lot. Being here, we've met so many different people. And that was really his father and I, that was the reason we wanted to move him here. We wanted him to have a true international education. I didn't want him to feel married to one place. I wanted him to be a world traveler effortlessly.
Wonderful.
That's our reason, yeah.
That's so beautiful.
Similar, I would say the same thing. My husband and I, we talked about it, discussed it. We had both traveled some before we had children, but at the point where we were with them, we wanted them to experience something different than what they could see in the United States. At the time, we were living in the South, so it's pretty much the same. You know, it doesn't matter even now. Certain things happen a certain way. It hasn't changed. And so we wanted to give them that opportunity to travel, to see and meet people who maybe looked like them or didn't look like them, didn't sound like them, or maybe sounded like them, maybe had the same beliefs or maybe mainly didn't have the same beliefs, so that they would learn to appreciate people for who they are and not for, whether or not they're just like them. And so one of the things that we have really treasured, our oldest, he has said he's never moving back to the States. He loves it here. He is probably the exact picture of what we really wanted to happen with our children, which was that they would open their hearts and minds to see and become friends with a plethora of people from different regions of the world. And that's it. I mean, I need two hands to, list his friends from where they are from. And that's the beauty of living here and giving that. And there's no way that they could have received that, I'm just being honest, had we remained where we were in the United States.
That's
it would
so
have
true.
been
Can I
one
add
side.
something to that? Can you imagine, just on a side note, can you imagine a leader of the United States
Exactly.
having lived abroad and really get to see who people are at their core and what culture means and what religion means, to go back then to the United States and make actual policy based off of that experience. I think that's just so empowering to me. I don't know.
Wow.
We
That's
tend to
such
throw
a
the
great
word.
thought.
We tend to
Yeah.
throw the word diversity around.
Yeah.
But living here, I can remember in the States when we used to say that the States was a melting pot, and I never really liked the phrase melting pot. I always used to tell my students, the States is kind of like a big salad. If you take everything that you want to just toss into a salad, you can. But the States has a diverse number of people. But when you move here, you find that diverse number of people who are communicating. They're talking, and we're not necessarily making, a community by itself.
not melting.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't melt.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It just mixes.
It
Exactly.
mixes. That is absolutely true. And both Bushra and I,
Just waiting to
we
put
were
that
born
into-
here, we grew up here. So we have experienced the diversity, the acceptance.
Yes.
So you don't have to be,
Yeah.
as you said, it doesn't have to be a melting pot. You could all be different, but at the core, you're all humans.
You're all humans.
Same values. You need safety. You need, a good positive environment around you. You need opportunities. So people need the same things. It's just that culturally you may be a little different. Some nuances may be a bit different. But that is the beauty of this country. 200 nationalities. And everybody coexists peacefully. And then when we go into school buildings and we see the diversity there, it's heartening for us.
It is.
Because we see that everybody is trying to do their best. So my children's best friends are from different countries, which is fine. So we know their culture so well. They have sleepovers at our place.
Right.
They're there. So it's a beautiful place to be
Yes.
raising kids. Completely agreed.
Yes, exactly.
As an aspiring mother, I'm now convinced. You guys, I have my plan figured out.
Good. We're glad to help.
Got 3 moms telling me.
Absolutely.
All right. So with that, I think we have a natural transition to what we're here to talk about, because we're talking about melting pot, different nationalities coming together. But we do need a common language to communicate. And English tends to be that language over here in the UAE. Arabic is also a language that we're all constantly trying to learn and communicate in. But English also ends up being an important language. And I know that Ms. Vanessa and Ms. Aisha, both of you have a powerful background in literacy, whether as teachers or administrators. So let's talk about your impact in literacy in UAE schools and what's going on over the past few years. Erin, would you like to take the conversation off with the first question?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So over the years, literacy has become a priority. How do you approach literacy instruction in your schools, and how do you think it has changed over the last few years? Because I understand, Vanessa, you've been here for many, many years now, right?
Yes, 11 years.
11 years. And Aisha, you
3
moved here
years.
3 years ago. So you must have seen the transition, or you must have seen that focus shift from other areas to literacy now. So how are you adopting the change and implementing in your schools?
Okay, one thing I'd like to say is just with my history of being here in the UAE, when I first came over, it was a focus on not just literacy, but it was science and math as well. And I think one of the things that I've seen change in terms over the years has been the pull for literacy. As you mentioned, English is that common language that we have here. So in order for children, people in this region to be able to communicate and just be, I'm going to use a phrase that's used often, but global citizens, I think that the leaders have done a really good job of having plans like the 2030 plan of where we want students to be, the population and so forth, has led to having more focus on reading. In particular. But when we talk about literacy, we're talking about the ability to read, write, speak, and everything. And I do believe that in my school in particular, we know that that is a main focus because our students can't do well in the math
Yep.
or the science if they don't have the comprehension skills or the ability to access the material at the level that it's written for them. So it's really important for us that we focused on trying to build with the lower skills of, let's say, phonics, fluency, then building into the vocabulary, the comprehension. And I do have to say that for us in particular, This is our second year using iReady, and the first year using magnetic readers. And with magnetic readers in our primary grades, we are seeing a huge shift in how our students are able to access reading ability that spills over to make the literacy part and other subjects
Yes.
within the school, and just giving them that ability to own their learning. That's the huge part of it, because we want our students to be, at my school in particular, and I'm sure it's like that in most schools, you want them to be fluent not just in English, but you want them to hold on to the language that they are growing up with in their house as well. So it's about teaching skills that transcend and transfer into every single subject, and that's our goal. That's our goal.
Excellent.
So that when they hit the world, it's not where they have to go back and learn something, but they have the skills that they need.
Great.
I think I agree with everything you're saying. I'm saying yes and nodding my head very hard because I agree with everything. I know when I came into Clarion 2 years ago, this is my third year in the country, but 2 years at Clarion. When I came into Clarion 2 years ago, when you are writing curriculum for a new system, you kind of step back and you take stock of what has already happened and what's happening and what's on the ground running right now. And you look at what you can do to enhance that. That's just the general consensus of what you do with curriculum. Clarion's a bit of a different school. It's the school where I believe students are able to be exactly who they are, and we rate them from that. This is the first school that I've ever been at where you literally meet a child where they are. So when I think about how we address literacy, we went straight, we backwards planned, okay? Sure. We looked at the end in mind. We did all the things that good curriculum writers and teams do. But what we did was we literally put the child in mind. And knowing that it's such a diverse population, and I was sharing that there are 65 different nationalities at our school, and I can't tell you how many languages that come from that.
Yeah.
We had to look at that and make it make sense. So some of the things that we did was we wrapped our full curriculum around our reading. So that was every subject. Even in our special area, we created the idea first of reading across the curriculum, and then we actually created the plan of reading across the curriculum and what that really meant. One of the examples is we have these pages on every door of our classrooms, and every grade level writes a page to a book so that when a child goes around the school, you can read the entire book, and everybody has ownership and accountability for that purpose. You go to grade 1 and they've started the book, and then you look at grade 2 and they've connected with what grade 1 did, and it's the same characters, but it evolves. And that's just kind of creating the atmosphere of literacy in a place, and creating that engagement piece. And we've done a lot of drop everything and read. Again, these aren't things that are new, but we've kind of upped the ante in these. We've made it really big, where we've cleared our whole football yard, and parents have come at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we read for 30 minutes together. We need to push the understanding of why reading is important, but most important is the engagement. But what I would say the most important piece is using data to drive reading and bringing the parts of reading down. And iReady, I will say, I push for it really hard because I know how iReady breaks down reading into the science of reading components. And so I know every little inch of what every student needs to understand about reading and where they either fall short of or where they're really strong in. I just had a conversation with a parent who couldn't understand what their child's reading hurdle is. They understand, they're understanding it. And we realized that their child had a phonological awareness barrier. And that restricts them in third grade because then they're in multisyllabic words. And the flow and the fluency of understanding multisyllabic words and root words and Latin root words and prefix and suffix, that was their hindrance. So yes, they can understand when it's being read to them and when it's put in context, but on their own, they were struggling. So I think the biggest hurdle of all, besides engagement, was using pure data to break reading down into parts in order to understand wholly who a child is as a reader.
That's great. That's great for us to hear because at the end of the day, when we talk about iReady, so I've had the opportunity to use it as a teacher as well. And that was precisely what we realized, that this program is giving you the data or the granular
Yes.
detail that you need in order to truly offer personalized instruction.
And I
It's
just
true.
add, though, I would like to add, because you hit on, I think, the number one factor of one of the reasons that when 2 years ago, it was during spring break about this time, I started trying to research, or almost 3 years ago now, I started researching what could help within Murdiff American School in terms of closing the gaps for our students. And I even mentioned to teachers, I said, unless we have the data to tell us exactly where that area of weakness is for the students. It's kind of like throwing a dart at a target and,
is.
with your eyes closed.
It
That's
is.
what it's like because you don't know. You're using curriculum that, has been created or is that in place. And then you're saying, wait a minute, they're not doing well or they can't read. Okay, to say a child can't read, I'm sorry, that's one of my pet peeves.
Right.
You can never tell me that a child cannot read
Yep.
because, boy, can I go on that one for a while.
Same.
Because it's not that a child can't read, it's that we haven't found, or you're not using the data, or we haven't found that piece of data, which iReady has done for us very clearly, and I'm so glad we have it. But it has clearly outlined exactly where we need to work with students. And so, Aisha, you hit right the nail on the head. That it is that piece and it is that thing that allows us to be able to determine those needs. Because like I said, to say a child can't read, no, that's a scapegoat to me.
Absolutely.
Okay.
it is,
But
yeah.
teachers don't come from university knowing that. I went to
Exactly.
school specifically to study reading.
Okay.
I went to school specifically to study these components. So they don't come out. You don't come out of university understanding how to assess the different components of reading. That's just not a reality. But to have this platform to break that down, those data meetings become everything.
Okay.
Yep. They become everything.
It does.
Yeah.
I agree.
So I love how we've already dived into the nitty gritty. I love it. It's just getting very serious and into the nitty gritty. But you've talked about a number of different things that I'd like to unpack with you a little bit so our audience can also think about them. First is the term science of reading. And I love how it's already come into the conversation. I think a lot of people are still unfamiliar with that term. So would you like to expand, maybe Ms. Aisha, since you mentioned it? What do you mean by the science of reading and how is it relevant to this conversation?
Correct. So the science of reading actually isn't new.
Exactly.
But it has evolved tremendously. So the science of reading are all the components of reading: phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, vocabulary, comprehension, fluency. It's where you kind of, if you don't know, kind of Scarborough's rope,
Reading rope.
where you kind of break the two domains apart with the language and the word recognition, and you focus on the components that kind of weave those in together in order to get to comprehension, because the ultimate goal of reading is to be able to comprehend. That is that your end goal. You want to be able to walk away after reading, understanding what you've read. And in that, you have to break those components down, especially for young readers, because there are hurdles that happen there that you won't identify with just going through a regular course of instruction of reading. If you break those things apart and you understand the vocabulary is a hindrance because that leads to comprehension, or fluency or slow reading is a hindrance because that also leads to being able to remember and comprehension. Though if you focus on all of those things and check those boxes early years and lower elementary, then by the time that child is a third grade reader, they're off and running, because by that time they're no longer learning to read, right? They're reading to learn. I know that specifically because I got into it because my son is dyslexic. And so I was able to really dive into understanding how to break the components of reading down. I always got into the IEP meetings and what is the problem? He can read. I don't understand what's the problem. And I had to step back as an educator and really check myself and go back to school and understand what his deficits were. And when I understood that, it unlocked a box for him. I always get emotional talking about it, but it unlocked a box for him that he himself grew within reading, but he then grew in education altogether because he then understood that it wasn't him. it's not something wrong with me, it's something I wasn't being taught. And so now that I see that with other students, I go in completely with, all right, our first week of school, we are benchmarking, and then we're going to progress monitor each component of reading for those who need it.
Wow.
That's the
powerful.
success, yeah.
Wow. All right. Miss Vanessa, what about you? What has your experience been with the science of reading, and how are you kind of bringing that into what you do today?
I think our answers are always going to be very similar. But one of the things that I would say when you said that it's something that's been around. It's been around. Even I'm in some groups on Facebook about the science of reading, and when you have the opportunity to talk with educators who, have retired. They were teachers 40 or 50 or 60 years ago. Some of the same things that we're talking about, the components that are there, they used those components. And that's one of the reasons someone like me is able to read. Do I remember exactly having phonics lessons in school? No, I really can't go back and tell you that I had a phonics lesson, okay? But when I think back very clearly and I can get these snippets in my memory of where, a teacher kept going through certain sounds, blends, digraphs, diphthongs, and that's one of the things right now that I realized, and one of the pushes for having gone to iReady was that we have teachers who do come from different areas. And so the science of reading, while I'm saying that it's not new, depending on where you went to school and what your degree was in, you may or may not have gotten those components. So one of the things that I love about the science of reading is that it forces, in particular, secondary teachers. And I'm not saying that all elementary teachers or primary teachers have it exactly right, but it forces secondary teachers to realize, wait a minute, I know my job as a literacy teacher is to teach comprehension. I know my job. However, there are two parts to students learning. And you said it, in the beginning, those foundational skills that they need, that's learning to read. When we get to third grade, which is that huge, especially when we think about Common Core,
Correct.
It's a huge thing. That's it's that grade level that sort of it tethers between primary, my foundational skills, and me beginning to use those now foundational skills to be able to comprehend what I'm reading. And so if you don't understand that when you have students in your class who can't read fluently, that their reading fluency is impeding their ability to comprehend. So now you need to identify, well, what's keeping a child from reading fluently? Is it phonics, or is it vocabulary? Is it phonics with, multisyllabic words or something that they should have received in third grade? But if no one is picking up on that,
sorry. Go ahead. Again, the teacher in me is waking up, and I have all these memories flooding through. But I completely agree with what you say, and so yes, they are typically 25 to 30 kids in a classroom. But then how do you understand what each child's needs are when it comes to literacy or numeracy or any other subject as well? But surely for literacy, because as you said, that is the basis, that's the language. So if you don't know the vocabulary, you would struggle in other subjects as well. So back in 2010, when I was sitting with my students, and I realized that I want to help each and every one of them. But how do I do that? Because back in the day, technology wasn't that advanced, right? So then, you try and make small groups, and you try and do stuff that you can. But that was, a thing in the past now. Because of technology, because of program like iReady, you do have that power.
Exactly.
You can actually go down to every child's individual needs, and then offer resources and intervention accordingly.
It's true.
So I would dive into another area now of teacher training, because again, there is diversity, and which is lovely, which is a beautiful thing to have in a school. But when you have teachers and you're both in leadership positions, how do you ensure that each and every teacher is empowered or is aware of what strategies to use, what programs, what resources? So how do you ensure that?
You've got to go into the classrooms. It's knowing your teachers, it's one, building that family of and that level of where teachers, it's a trust. It has to be trust based, and that's one of the things. So, for instance, going into the classrooms, I always tell teachers, I'm going to come into your classrooms. Please don't feel that I'm coming in to, pick at something that you're doing wrong or anything like that. And I'll tell them, if it's something and you need a little help with something or a small group, tell me, put me to work. But it's building the trust, one. It's surveying teachers, even to get their own opinion, for them to be reflective enough to be able to say, you know what? I appreciate that we are using iReady because my skills in teaching phonics are not what they need to be. And I try to be honest with teachers and explain to them so that they understand. I'm not putting you in a position of where I want you to shut down. It's providing you through professional development, PLCs, and our PLC for this year, and it's probably going to be the same for next year, is using data. Because it's one of the things that I found just from, with us being an American school, we have to use MAP as well, but just in my opinion, because MAP was never designed, I'm going to say that, MAP was never designed to be used as it's used here. And I understand the reason why the country uses it with us being an American school. However, when it's used the way it's used here, we can't necessarily figure out, again, the way iReady defines for us whether a child has a weakness in phonemic awareness or if it's vocabulary or something. And teachers need to be able to know it's okay that I don't know this. Through PLCs together, we're going to learn about it. We're going to learn how to use the data. We're going to, or it could be a small group. And so going into classrooms through learning walks, through observations at time, but those observations that are more trust-based, I would say, going in and then having the coaching moments afterwards. So being reflective. Whenever I go into a classroom with teachers, when we sit down after, I always say, okay, you tell me. What do you think? How was that lesson? And you'd be amazed at what you get in terms of response, because sometimes in the beginning when I started that, I was like, they're not going to pick up on that. And most of them can see it. So then it's not just about the seeing, it's now coming up with a plan. What are we going to do to improve this so that the next time when you're teaching a lesson that's similar to this, or even next year when you teach this lesson, or maybe we figured out, you know what? Totally bombed the lesson. I need to go back and I need to reteach it. I tell them it's okay. It's better to reteach than to just say, okay, I didn't do well enough with that. My students didn't get it, so I'm going to move on. It's creating the coachable moments. It's creating the space for teachers to plan collaboratively. That's really important. And I would say just having a say-so in what they are learning and how they are learning it. So we want teachers to differentiate for students, but sometimes I think as schools, we forget that we should be differentiating for our teachers as well.
Oh,
What a great thought.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll piggyback on that because, again, we are one person at this point. So,
Exactly.
and I really appreciate your viewpoints. It makes you feel empowered that what you've been doing is best practice. So I appreciate having this conversation with you, with you all. And the same, I do a lot of, personally, I've come from schools in the States that has a heavy coaching model. And so at Clarion, I've put into play student-centered coaching, which is based off of the class's goal as students, based off of data. And that's what we use for the teachers' coaching points, because it is all data-driven. We also use the feedback from what teachers want to do and what they need to do. But that's one part of it. Coaching is necessary, but there's no stronger power in this than modeling. There's no stronger power than standing in front of a classroom with a teacher because they've asked you to, because they desire you to be there, to see what could be enhanced, what could be better. PD is great, and we know sometimes when you hear PD, you kind of eye roll like, oh my gosh, we got to go through another
Exactly.
PD. But there's new innovations in PED, and we have to kind of step into those. Some of we've done PEDs where we've linked with schools in America and done PD at the same time and had those conversations. That's a highly engaging professional development. We've done a lot of teachers. We do teacher PD, where the teachers give most of the PD because we've seen what they've done. I know that you all do the same thing. But to engage them into the training of, because we have to understand, again, differentiation. We have to understand and meet them exactly where they are as well, and understand what they do and they don't come to the table with. But the most important thing to me outside of modeling is when you're staffing your school to be very strategic about what your philosophy and your mission is, because the buy-in to what programs you have or what your how your curriculum is ran, it will not be seen in the same way by someone who has an opposition to that understanding. So if you've strategically staffed and then you've created that relationship and then you've trained consistently and it's not uncomfortable. I'm not uncomfortable with you being in my room because you're always in my room and you're helping. It's not a watchful eye, although I am always watching. It's not a watchful eye. The students know who you are. You're teaching on a regular basis, co-teaching. So that's part of the, I guess, relational part of that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Because we have also observed that change can be pretty daunting for teachers. So if you go in with a great solution, a great program that would really make their lives easier, but they won't really jump at it. They won't really embrace it because of the fear of change. And, so
I would say that it's not even an awareness that people have about change. It's just, having been a teacher for so many years as well, I was always the kind of teacher, I wanted to try something new every year. That was me. And then my husband had to tell me some years ago, you can't expect everyone to do what you're doing or how you're doing it, okay? But again, it's my passion. Yeah. So my passion is reading. So the passion is getting children. A part of it, I'll be honest, for me is getting kids to love reading. And that's like an uphill battle sometimes, I feel. But we can't get children to desire to read until we get the teachers to desire to read. So when you talked about modeling, it was like this bell went off. And I remember 4 or 5 years ago when I started at Murdoch American, I was teaching a 6th grade class, ELA. And one of the big things that I kept saying to teachers was, you need to read to them, read alouds. You need to read to them, think alouds. You model for them how to think. And I had teachers who were like, but I'm reading aloud. And I'd gone into classrooms to see the read alouds. And I'm going, not quite what I'm looking for here. So I invited teachers to come to my classroom. And I wanted them to see, don't be intimidated when someone is coming into your classroom. Use it as a moment to grow or to even shine. You know what I'm saying?
You did flip it.
And so I'll never forget one of the teachers at the school, she came in and I was doing a read aloud of this book. And I only did a page and a half of this read aloud, but it was so intense. It was about a 911 call and someone screaming, the baby, you dropped the baby. And it's 911, Epiphany, what's your emergency? And that teacher, to this day, she goes, the reason I do read alouds is because of the way you modeled it for me.
Wow.
Okay, so I think sometimes we have to remember that by having this, diverse group of teachers, everyone may have a different passion. So even though there may be an elementary teacher who's teaching every subject to students, we have to remember that elementary teacher may have a passion for math.
Exactly.
So then we have to harness and, shape them to be able to learn to love every subject that they're teaching, at least to a level to bring that love in for everyone else.
Beautiful. That sounds
As someone who's meeting
wonderful.
teachers all the time from different schools in the region, I feel so inspired. I feel like I'm going to be taking these ideas to them now. And this is a great transition into an important topic of discussion. So you talked about how your inviting teachers who you feel are championing something really well to come and present that to their peers. So that's a bit of an example of an asset-based approach where you're building off of what someone's strong in. So to actually apply that now to the literacy classroom, so we talked about how diversity can be a strength for us and our students as well. So how can we bring an asset-based approach to the literacy classroom? How can we leverage students' native languages and backgrounds to help them with English literacy?
I think something, let me just be honest. I've always taught, like I said, at international schools, and I would put that in strong quotes, in the United States. Not that we didn't have students of different languages, but this is a new level that I struggled with, to be honest with you. I mean, in the U.S., when you're talking about another language, you're typically talking about the only other major language, which is Spanish. And because a lot of us have taken Spanish and we understand it, it's kind of already incorporated into a lot of our curriculum anyhow. But when you come here and you're talking about hundreds of different, I feel like it's hundreds of different languages sometimes, that you have to kind of have a different approach, because you obviously aren't going to know everything, and Google Translate is not your teacher.
Nope.
Okay, so that's number one. Some of the things that we've done that have worked, that I've seen that have worked, are the peer-led instruction. It's very big. So we may have students, even in upper grades, that speak the same language as a student in a lower grade and comes and supports them. What we do is, our emphasis is that 80% of the time you are speaking in English, but then you have that other percentage of time that you're really breaking it down into their language components, and in order for them to understand the instruction, but also encouraging them in their language also to speak in English. So that's one thing that we've done. We don't always have a student in an older grade or another grade that has a great grasp on both of the languages. But when we do utilize that. So a lot of peer connections, peer tutoring, peer reading has really been successful, because not only that, it makes them feel like they're not kind of this outcast that has to be taken to the side and given different instructions. You see students who have language deficits who sit and look lost in a class. And I don't have a single teacher in this school, with all the languages that are spoken, when I go into the rooms, that have a student who's looking lost.
That's one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen, by the way. A student who can't speak a word of English, they're new to the country, and they're just sitting in the corner, and they're feeling so isolated and so damaging to
and
their
they're
mental health.
undermined just because they don't know the language.
That's all that it is.
That's all.
And there's an assumption that they're just going to absorb the language as well, which I think really needs to be debunked. This idea that if you just immerse the student in the environment.
That's PD that has to happen. That professional development has to happen when you really talk about culturally responsive classrooms. See, that's the difference. Culturally responsive classroom training in the U.S. is not sufficient for here.
Okay.
It doesn't work here, because you're looking at so many different pieces to the puzzle here that don't necessarily just fall into one boat or the other.
Now you're speaking to something that we are trying to work on.
Yes, and that's what it is. And so we also do another thing that I really think is successful. It's called code switching. So we allow the student to, in some part, speak and write in their own language in order to communicate. Because at the end of the day, I want to know if you know the skill. I want to know if you know the thing that I'm teaching. I want to know if you've grasped the strategy. So I may get that in your language, and I may grade you according to that in a sense. But I also have noted what we have to work on in language, because you have your L support, you have your tutors that come in, you have all of those things. But when a teacher's in the classroom, it's just the teacher in that classroom, and that student is in there the majority of the time. So we'll give them the opportunity to write in their own language if they're struggling with writing, and then have that translated, which is what I love about being in a kind of a non-district, non-state mandated system, because I can actually assess you on what you actually know, and maybe the vehicle in which it's presented, I may need to work on your skills in that and how it's tested. Same with students who struggle with reading in general. I may need to understand that you can comprehend, but you're not writing quite yet. So or you're not a fluent reader, and if you've heard the text and now I can get you to communicate what it is. I know you've comprehended. I can check that box. I just now have to work on you being able to take this assessment in this way. But it's the same thing with our L students, being able to give them, and I say L students because they are all L essentially. A lot of them are, the majority are L students. So the other piece is also creating a truly language-rich environment. So when you go into a room, and I'm still, pressing this upon our teachers who are native English speakers and look at it through their lens, but it's good to have someone come in and say, I have no idea, if I'm not from this country or I'm not from your country and I don't speak your language, I have no idea what this means. Then what is culturally responsive classroom? What does it look like on the walls? And having those different languages set on the walls just to invite an encouraging environment to you belong here, and this is your environment as well.
That's so powerful, Aisha, because familiarity, right? So if you see something that's familiar to you, even if it's in another language, you tend to be more comfortable
From
with
your
it,
country.
and you're more open about it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Wow, I wish I was a student in
I
either
know.
your Aisha's or Vanessa's class, so you could go back in time. But this is so
Yeah.
heartening to know and to learn that all the great things you both are doing, and of course the whole fraternity, and that is what really motivates us every day. We get up in the morning and we are like, we have to do whatever we can in our capacity to support these heroes without capes. That's what
Heroes
we
without
call them.
capes.
I just like to say, I think probably the biggest thing, and it's one of the things that I haven't quite figured out how to make it work, but I've been researching more and more translanguaging and bringing that into schools.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think probably sort of going back on what you were saying, we do have to look at translanguaging and how do we bring it into schools to build. Because in my school, we are over 80% Emirati students. I think we're at about 83, 87% Emirati students. However, we still have over 37 different nationalities in our school. Okay, so taking into account those students who are coming in, we do have to figure out a way, how are we going to teach the language that we know we need to teach, but also provide our students with the comfort, enough comfort that they feel that we are welcoming them exactly as they are with who they are. I don't know about you, but in the States, I can give an example. I taught 2 girls who were from Poland. I was teaching 6th grade. They were from Poland. They knew no English, 0. Came into my school, and I was the teacher who had been trained, I was trained. I had that certification to teach someone who speaks English as a second language. All I could do was go back to, I'm going to go old-fashioned way of when I taught 1st grade. And we're going to label everything, and I'm going to keep repeating it for you. I'm going to have a small group time with you. But then, thank goodness, I had a parent who he was a grandparent of one of my other students who was from Poland. He volunteered to come into the school every day and sit during the time that they had me for English language arts to help. That was a huge factor. So I think we need to think about also in our community, we tend to not realize that we have people within the community that could be volunteers to come in and assist with making that level of comfort for our students.
What a great idea.
That's that cross-linguistic approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've had a very serious conversation. It's only fair to add a little bit
boy.
of play so that we be feeling a little lighthearted. So it's a very simple game. Each of you is going to get a little blackboard there. Just one second. Let me figure out how to fiddle with this mic. There we go. All right.
Thank you. Oh, I'm
And
gonna
so I'll
get
give each of you a little
chalk, too.
piece of chalk. It's a very simple game.
Okay.
I'm just going to read out 4 statements, and you have to share if you agree or disagree.
Oh.
Okay.
All right. And just to make sure that we're not being influenced by each other's responses, you get the little blackboard where you can write D if you disagree and A if you agree.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So now that we're all set up for this very special game, it's very simple, agree or disagree.
Okay.
Each of you has a mini blackboard and a piece of chalk. I'm just going to read out 4 statements, one after the other. And after every statement, I'll ask you to take a minute or a second to write down whether you agree or disagree. And at once, show us what you think with the blackboard. All right?
Okay.
Very simple. First statement. Most written content in the future will be AI generated. Agree or disagree? All right. We've got one agree, one disagree, and one agree. All right. I'm curious to know what the thought process for this one was. So since we have one disagree, Miss Vanessa?
It may be AI generated after someone else has already generated the idea, a human has. So sort of in the thought process of using AI, that someone has to come up with something that's written to be able for AI to make it better. So that's why I disagreed, because I think there will be a human who at least comes up with the initial idea, or that is my hope, okay, that we're still using
hopeful.
it. That's my hope, okay? So that's why I disagreed.
All right. Anyone wants to share why they agree with this statement?
I understand your point of view for sure. I do believe that it will be just a culmination of things that are already created and shared, but not necessarily always written. I've had several parents, which hurts my heart, breaks my heart, that have said to me, writing is a dead technology. They're not interested in their child learning how to write. Ooh. So I've had that said for years, many times, and they don't understand the strength in writing and the cognitive abilities that come with being able to put hand to pencil to paper, and understanding the impact that has on a child's just educational well-being. But I believe that in the future, what's happening, this transference of information just continues through, and what's added through podcasts and added through talking points that will be then generated. I just taking the handwriting portion out of it, I believe. That's where I see it happening.
Doesn't have to be handwritten.
That's the thing.
All right. Interesting. So the next statement. Children are losing the ability to develop strong writing skills due to technology. I think based off of your responses to the first question,
Yeah,
what you're
the
about to
answer.
say.
It's going to be the same.
It is going to be the same, yeah.
All right.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Disagree.
I love the optimism.
Repeat the question again.
So
Just let me make
students
sure.
are losing the ability to develop strong writing skills due to technology.
I can respond with my
Yeah.
disagree.
You can respond with disagree.
Well, it's kind of, I'd really like to be able to say I agree and disagree, okay? Because it depends on what is in place to force children to be able to write, okay? So if you create an environment of, let's do quick writes, you know, and there's a picture that's put up on the screen for a child to look at, and they each share, you know, for 3 to 5 minutes, someone's writing on this, and then you say stop, and someone has to share what they've written. You get students so excited about writing through the simple task of quick writes, where they're not judged on whether or not they put a capital letter in the right place or they didn't put an end punctuation mark somewhere. It is their ability to use their imagination. So if we can harness, here's what I truly believe, as educators, if we can learn to harness that imagination that students enter the school with, because kids enter school with a huge imagination. And if every year we keep harnessing it and making it where they are using their imagination,
This is the
it's
part where
always
I go.
it's going to be a
snap,
simple
snap, snap.
disagree to that, because
I would love to
so
agree
it's
with
the
that.
environment.
I would love to agree with that. I just feel that the environment is not suited for that
guess
any
I'm just
longer.
hopeful.
I'm a writer. I'm a I journal. I require that all the kids in our school journal. But I believe that when you start hearing that with parents, and even school districts are now taking that on. Now it is also different, because in the U.S., our end of grade assessments aren't handwritten in the U.S. as they are in other countries. So it is a difference. I think you'll see that shift more in kind of U.S., Canada than you do in India, or even in some of the Arab regions where handwritten, or China, where handwritten assessments are still necessary. In the U.S. and Canada, they are not.
Right.
Not
You
anymore.
don't get into university because you sit and write for 2 hours on an assessment. That's not how it works.
The third one is really fun, but it could get really controversial.
Oh, boy.
Okay, let's go.
Shawarmas are more delicious than falafel.
Oh.
Okay. No, that's the easy one
We
for me.
almost broke the chalk over there. Miss Vanessa got very excited.
Shawarmas are more delicious than falafels. Oh, disagree.
Ooh,
Me
okay. I feel like this is a question
Oh,
about whether you're a meat person or a vegetarian.
I don't know.
Okay, why do you disagree? Aram, why do you disagree with this?
I'm interested.
Clearly, because I want to have more calories.
Hello.
And falafel is deep fried. No,
Oh.
I'm just kidding. So I think falafel is a more a lighter, it's just, it's not light really, but more of a snack. But whereas shawarma can get rather,
It's dinner.
okay. Depends on the mood, I guess. Depends on the mood.
Miss Vanessa loves her shawarmas.
It's a taste that's in the falafel that I just can't. It's something that doesn't go with my taste buds.
That's very personal
I've
for you.
tried
Okay.
from the time that I entered the country until now. Someone will offer it, and it's just something about it. So that's why I was
Personal
quick on that one.
Personal preference is good.
I love both. So, but
Yeah, it's a tough one, actually.
I can actually eat more.
Falafel.
I'm more concerned with how much more I can eat of a thing.
Yeah.
I can eat more
Makes
Falafel
sense.
than the
I'm
Completely.
not concerned with
Can
that.
relate
To
to
be
that.
honest, I'm figuring out what's
I
better.
eat in real life. Yes.
All right, the last one, getting back to topic, but just sort of as a closing statement. It's impossible to close literacy gaps if most of your students are English language learners. Agree or disagree? I love this. Now we can all agree to disagree about that.
Absolutely.
And that's
Yes.
where we can close. Any final thoughts before we close today's podcast? First of all, thank you guys so much for being with us today. This
Thank you
has been
for
a
having
fantastic
us.
experience. I'm so excited for other educators to hear what you have to say because nothing's more powerful than hearing it from other educators and leaders.
And I would also like to thank you. And I disagreed with this, especially because we work with educators like yourselves. And we know the kind of efforts that are going in that, it's almost like a no-brainer. If we have educators like you, then there is no reason why English language learners should stay behind in literacy attainment.
Thank you.